Hi, my name is Mattia Murray, and welcome to The Longer Road. You are on the longer road if you have multiple intersectional identities that are often marginalized. You've had to work harder to get to the starting line, and you might feel behind. I'm here to provide hope, support, and practical tips, and to let you know that you're not alone. Welcome to my guest, Dom Chatterjee, and they or he are a yoga and meditation teacher of Southeast Asian descent, a writer, an activist, and was just about to launch into a great description of why these bios are so hard to do in any particular moment. And I would love for you to just keep saying what you were saying.
Sure. And thank you for having me here. I was saying, as a multiply marginalized person, particularly, called an activist, engaged in social justice, it got to the place where I feel like I'm always expected to just put my identities out there right away and say, I'm this, and this, which presents all kinds of issues. But it also, I just realized I missed the time in my life before that where even though it's frustrating if I spend a significant amount of time around somebody and they don't know my racial identity and they're guessing wrong, which happens to me a lot, that presents problems. But that doesn't mean that I need to always say, hello, I am a South Asian person, I am Bengali and Tamil, I am biracial, my mom is white, like all of these things. I don't want to have to march around and always say, and that's just, I'm only talking about racial and ethnic identity. I'm not even getting into what is my gender identity as a non-binary person. How many words or lack thereof might I use to describe that? Um, I'm a multiply disabled person. Am I trying to share that right away with somebody? Am I going to give somebody a list of every possible diagnosis I may have or every pain I might be feeling and why? No, it's exhausting and it becomes such a long list of stuff. It fills up the whole introductory space. And now I've said nothing else about who I am or even given people the space to feel into who I might be. Um, so right before you hit record, I was sharing a story about last year when this really hit me. And I was at a Buddhist conference. It was a great workshop on shared leadership. We were doing a introductory exercise of, I think it's like first say who we are, like our self perception. And I can't remember the middle place, but then we ended with saying who we thought the other person was after this very short exercise. And I said, I am a human being first. I realized I feel dehumanized sometimes, not always, sometimes with this list of identities that I'm supposed to like trot out, wave around. And I didn't say anything about gender. And it was really nice when the woman who was one of the main organizers and leaders of the whole conference saw me. She was saying who she thought I was. And she said something about woman or she, and then she stopped herself and she just paused, right? And we're just looking at each other like a really close distance and realized I don't think that was right. And I did say something like thank you or something. If I had introduced myself poorly with a quick description of my relationship to gender, I wouldn't have gotten to have that experience of really being seen without the label. And it was such a deeply meaningful experience. I'm trying to no longer give this list of identities and really check with myself which ones are relevant here. How comfortable am I sharing? Might I share this later in an interaction?
Thank you so much for that and for letting me just jump in and start recording because we had been talking and I was like, no, this is exactly relevant to, what this whole podcast is about, certainly. So, one of the things that I definitely want to talk about today is and did you start the website Rest for Resistance? Is that your
I did,
project?
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, can you talk about the beginning of that for you? I know it's been around for some years at this point. Like, how did that get started for you?
It has, and I so appreciate you asking because I don't think anybody really knows the story unless they've been in like a one-on-one conversation with me. And there's reasons for that. I was doing the work of QTPoC mental health, which is how it all started with peer support. Launched that in March 2016. I just really go, no, 2015. In March 2015, had been not the only leader of that work, but had been the central leader of that work for, all the good and bad that comes with that. And I am a freelancer because of being a disabled person. I have been a freelancer almost all of my career out of college. I'm like, now I'm just like, I have so many things to say about being a freelancer because of being a disabled person. I was very underpaid in a job that I was ghostwriting for somebody who does not have the problem of having to go out and say, these are all my identities, and you might not like me because of them, right? And I lost that job. Part of it was because I was negotiating for higher pay that's more in line with publishing standards. And without that, that was how I was able to look at my budget and say, at least I have rent and I can eat. I didn't even have health insurance at the time. And I was just trying to cobble together enough to survive. And then I was doing so much of this peer support work. It was just like, I can't keep doing this without any funding in this organization. So that's when I channeled my frustrations working in publishing and also was hearing a lot of the community need that we're gathering in all these online spaces that were not created for us. And I don't know how to just launch a whole online forum. That's something that may be in the future, but at least with my publishing background, I knew the problems with publishing, with people submitting their work to an editor who then says, okay, but more people will click on this if we change the title. Or a lot of non-binary and transgender people are being pushed to not have our pronouns represented while we're even the writer of the work or when we're being featured in the work. That did happen to me recently in terms of not being the writer, but somebody said, well, using they and he pronouns gets confusing. So can you pick one? Right. And I didn't want to pick one, but I also understood as an editor, okay, I guess I'll just go along with it. But there's a lot of that for all marginalized people in media is, well, I'll just go along with it to get some representation. And where do we have a space where we don't get pressured to go along with it by people who are really just trying to learn from our experience and often conscious or unconscious, really like extracting stuff from us that they can go out and even make more money off of or get more success based on what they learned from multiply marginalized people. So I just wanted to create a space where we could try something different in publishing. And also something that felt like it was a break after going to Facebook, after going to read an article in New York Times or somewhere. Where could we just get a break? And it was a key part for me to not use stock photos and to make the choice to invest in community created art, to really make it that space that's about the very broad global community of trans people of color, queer people of color, and specifically those of us who are disabled. And where can we go and just be like, yep, I belong here.
Yeah, that is so important. And that question you asked, I mean, I've written this down exactly correctly, but where do we have space to not be pressured to just go along with it? That hit me really hard because that is very much my experience when I do enter more. I mean, corporate is such a, it's not the entirety of the idea that I'm talking about, but like when I enter what I consider to be more like corporate spaces for whatever reason, often, in my effort to attempt to survive capitalism.
Yep.
And then this space, exactly the way you said that is just like, being pressured to just go along with it, make it easier, take up less space. You don't be difficult with your needs and demands and accommodations. And I mean, obviously, pronouns is like a huge thing. And then that next point, like that related point, then there are people who are extracting this and then they get to go and make money off of it. They're like, okay, I have, learned just enough that I can now go be a DEI consultant. So
Yeah.
I don't know. That's just like one area I've looked at that has that problem.
That dynamic keeps us in conversations that are like 101 education level.
Yeah.
And that's if you go out and try to find anything about marginalized identity on the internet, it's usually this 101 education level of information, which also carries a lot of stigma just because it's simplified
Yep.
to be at that level. But when there's nothing else, there's no real trail to follow of what else does this mean to people who are in the lived experience. It gets really oppressive. I don't really have another word for it right now. It gets really oppressive and limiting, and that limits our beliefs about who can I be in the world and what can I do, right? Not just in career, but in any sector of life. What can I do? What kind of families can I have? What kind of friendships can I have? I think when I see pictures of trans people just living their lives and hanging out together, it's so nourishing in a way that seeing a lot of other photos of people just never will be for me.
Yeah. Oh, all such good points. I feel like we could talk for a long time about like any, any individual one of these. I do want to keep going in like the story of Rest for Resistance, this, movement and website that you've started. Like so I know you told us about when it started and, what your intentions were when it was starting. Like anything, I know it's probably way too many stories to list, but like the progression of that since 2015, like where do you feel like it is now? What is the work that you're engaging with now with Rest for Resistance?
I'm happy to say we're still here. And it is a struggle for a lot of reasons I just don't even want to get into. But I have good news that we just found out this month that we are getting funding beyond anything we've had. We tend to operate with like maybe 20,000 a year. And that gets depressing. Or it's like, wait, we're doing all this community work with less money than a lot of people live on it for an individual person's budget. It's coming with all kinds of anxiety and excitement and what's next, but that feels really amazing because through the 2020 2021, I was just like, okay, I need to put anything on social media to let people know we haven't just shut down and closed up shop. Was letting people know the organization was in its own period of slower movement and rest, which I think was incredibly important. That organizations, particularly any organization with a social media presence, cannot always be in a phase of churning out content for public consumption. And just because people aren't seeing that doesn't mean that we're not here in the work, especially when it's work that relates to our personal lives. I just kept thinking, what is Rest for Resistance in practice for everybody who's been in the work, right? As a meditation teacher, as a writer, as an artist, as one of like the peer support moderators on Facebook, all these people who've contributed to this community-led work. What is Rest for Resistance? Like, how are we living into it? How are we deepening our relationship to it? So with this funding, not only are we going to be doing our second annual event, which will be end of June, beginning of July, which is Rest Fest, but I'm like, we will finally be getting back to publishing. And in this time that Rest for Resistance hasn't been publishing over the last 3 years, I've been seeing a lot of queer-led, disabled-led media outlets being shut down. So, I used to feel like, oh, there's a lot of people doing some work that's not exactly the same. It wasn't, mental health and disability focused. But now it's like most of the queer media is happening within these big media outlets, like Condé Nast, who runs them. Um,
Mhm.
and ultimately, that's never going to be the same relationship to the content as a creation process and for the audience. as something that's truly led by people who are multiply marginalized. Not just sometimes, not just we have the token, but it's all of us. And there's so much diversity among us. We want
Yeah.
to work to represent that instead of, I think the 101 level seems to try to homogenize our experiences. So it's like,
Yes.
well, all trans people this, well, all disabled people this, everybody with this condition that. You sort of touched on that before we hit record, and I appreciate that. That when we're looking for resources in our own healing, and we find this advice, and they're writing it as if it applies to everybody in that situation, and you're going, it's not accessible to me. Well, what do I do now? I have bipolar disorder. That's how I feel about pretty much everything on the internet about bipolar disorder. And that's something I'm still personally carrying and trying to figure out, well, what's next?
Yeah. Oh, again, so much there. Brain is going in so many directions.
We
Um,
can also talk not on recording another day.
yes, that would be great. Yeah. I did want to also ask you the question that I usually ask people at the beginning, but we kind of like launched right in, which is, what are you passionate about right now? And that can be, just personally, but like, what's really top of mind for you, like today, this week? Like, what's really been present for you?
The first thing that came to mind when you said the question is learning. I've really just gone back to being a student, and I don't want to be an expert more than like 1% of the time. I recognize there might be that 1% of the time when I can share something from a place of expertise, but I'm really loving learning, and I'm appreciating letting go of my own internal expectations and some of the societal pressures on how I perform as a learner, as a student. And just being like, I don't know, or I don't have words for my reaction yet. I'm currently studying MA social justice at Union Theological Seminary, and theology is just like, I don't know what I'm doing. I am very uncomfortable in that space. I do not want to know what I'm doing. I'm so happy I'm taking a queer theology class right now. And that's my entry point to feel like I'm not completely lost in this the academic community I'm in. But just to realize, there's no amount of work in social justice where somebody's like, I got it all. And
Yeah.
we're committed to transformation and change. So things aren't supposed to stay the same, and they are supposed to change. And then you got to relearn, sometimes in ways that are very uncomfortable. So yeah, I'm very dedicated to learning for myself, and also to be a better community leader. And my other thought is food. I used to be a food journalist, actually, and I had to go through a lot of healing after not being in food journalism for a minute, related to that job I lost, when I was like, okay, I have to crowdfund, but I'm doing it for me and the community, and launch Dress for Resistance. I'm in such a great place with my relationship with food now, and in a better place with my relationship with my body. And it's just so nice to love food and be excited and passionate about food, and also not have to do that in a way where I'm trying to survive capitalism at the same time. I would love to go back to food journalism. I consider, that it's something I can return to later. But it was also really hard to be a multiply marginalized person in the food journalism space, which I wasn't prepared for when I started in my early 20s.
Mm. Yeah, which again, I imagine like you could probably record a whole episode just talking about that topic, right? Like that's why I love asking people about their passions, is like I can hear how much is in there for you that in that topic. And also just congratulations for reaching a better relationship with your body and food. That's huge. It's so much work. It's like very much swimming against the current of at least this culture that we're currently speaking in. That, yeah.
Yeah, and to be in a disabled body and say, I love my body, I love the experiences that my body provides for whatever the rest of myself is beyond the physical. And I'm learning as a yoga teacher, as a meditation teacher, it's been really difficult for me to put myself out there. And part of it is I need to be prepared to show up and teach regardless of do I feel super healthy today? I not only have, lower back issues, I've been walking with a cane again for the last 5 months. And I've built a good relationship to my cane, but this is also the longest I've needed one. But I'm still in dance class as part of my MA social justice program, which I love. And, I'm getting to that place of how do I trust myself to show up and offer a as safe as possible. There's no perfectly safe, but I mean really like physically safe experience for people in guided movement. And maybe I don't need to do exactly what they're doing that day. Maybe it's better for me to have my boundaries of, yeah, I've done that a bunch of times, but I can't demo it today. But I can absolutely walk you through it. And here's somebody else who you can see do the movement. That's really tough, but I'm glad I have support to feel like being a disabled teacher does not make me a lesser teacher. It doesn't mean that I need to stay home when I don't feel well. That's a big thing for me in all my disabilities is feeling like I need to isolate myself away from people and only show up when it's like I'm together enough, I'm sane enough, all these things. But I'm so happy that disabled community can be so supportive of each other and getting through these things because the larger society is not.
Yeah. Oh, that also really hits home for me. The idea that like I should only be showing up, in public or essentially, being existing in public when I am relatively well, whatever that means for my body and brain, and that like everything else needs to be hidden away. Another thing I've really been both loving seeing autistic non-speakers who are getting access to open communication for the first time, like posting on social media, being able to express themselves, and also just like so deeply frustrated that almost every single one of them is essentially the first thing they're sharing is like, I've been understanding you the whole time. Like, this has been, I'm 20 years in and I'm finally getting to speak, and actually like express myself and how, just that again, like people with all these different identities coming together where they just like did not have access. And then that there are people who still don't have access, you know, because of, and one of the Black autistic writers I follow talks about that a lot. It's like, hey, this is great that more people are getting more open communication. And have you noticed it's largely white people who are getting this access as well? So anyway, that was again like huge topic. We don't have to go down that road, but just that like that's what that brought up for me when I was thinking about like my discomfort around being who I am on a bad day in public, even though it can be uh, really useful for people to see me doing that because I also have privileges and I'm less likely to be physically unsafe. For example, like stimming in public. Like I'm very unlikely to be
Right.
approached or, people might say something or give me a weird look, but like I'm very unlikely to have a police interaction, for example, being like a small white person.
Yeah, it does happen. I mean, that brings up difficult memories for me. And I'm like, for me as a mental health activist, I'm like, can we get to a space where people can interact with the world in public in ways that make sense for them and not everybody has to be like, oh, I get how you're communicating, so it's okay. I want to see more people just talking to themselves or a tree or like not just another person who's physically there. And we've gotten to a place with like headsets where it's okay if you're connected through technology talking to somebody on the phone. But if you're walking around talking to your ancestors out loud, like we are being watched and possibly there will be police interaction based on being witnessed in that place. And this is some of what I'm trying to understand in, studying social justice in an interfaith and spiritual way is how do all these frameworks of understanding the world and believing the world around us relate to our concept of shared society? I mean, shared reality. The things that we all can agree are real, and yes, it works like that. Even something like stimming, it's like so people can't move their body in a particular way, or I know some stimming can be verbal, right? People can't just make a sound or something because other people are like, oh, that doesn't jive with my forms of communication. It's really sad for me, and I have to believe that there have been different societal norms around reality and how we interact with it, and we're in a very limited space, especially because of globalization. We're all over the world trying to understand each other, and I hope that we can shift past this to a place that's more open to so many different kinds of communication. And that, just like if I hear somebody speaking in a language that's not English and I don't understand them, and I can just go, okay, whatever, that information isn't for me. Can't we do that with stimming? Can't we do that with talking out loud to somebody who's not right there? Because for me, during 2020 and 2021, I was very isolated, and I thought I can't just look for support from humanity. And I did start talking to insects, and I did start talking to the sky and the rain, and it got me through, and it gave me a broader sense of community. Not that the community I had among people was just gone and I didn't care, but when that community is inaccessible, I don't have to feel alone.
I love that so much. And that has also been a part of my own experience of the world is, yeah, having this broader sense of community that's not just human. And another thing I was thinking about, like the societal norms and about reality, I like that phrase, societal norms about reality, is, as people have been learning more and let's say being exposed on social media or through friends or, at school or whatever, like being exposed to identities that you had no knowledge about before or very little knowledge or only stereotypical knowledge. Part of what people are learning then is either they're getting to know one particular person and getting to know their expression of these things and then maybe extrapolating from there. Like what I'm getting at is that the brain loves and latches onto and creates stereotypical frames for things like very easily. It's part of the way that our brain like encodes information. It tends to try to simplify it and turn it into, easy to understand little bits of information rather than, oh, that's just one version of this identity in this person that I now know. And that part of, I actually really, really love that analogy of if I hear a language and I don't understand it, we don't march up to that person and be like, stop it. Like, you must speak
Some
a
people
language that
do,
some people do. That is
but
true.
it's not as common.
That is true. It's becoming increasingly socially unacceptable to do that. But yes, it definitely does still happen. But yeah, that's the exact equivalent of if you see someone communicating or communing with nature or, experiencing the world in their particular way to like insist you have to only use the bits of language and communication that make sense to me. Like that, it
Right.
sounds so ridiculous when you put it that way, but that is a lot of people's experience.
Yeah, people really want a logical reason for why something is happening the way it's happening. And we
Yeah.
do not always need that. We really
Yeah.
do not always need that. And I feel like I have to ground I say things sometimes and it could be like, am I just crazy? And it's like, I am, I'm fine with that. But I'm also, I'm also a yoga teacher, right? So if I'm talking to different parts of my body out loud and I'm like, me, how are you feeling right now? How would you like to, move? Which stretch feels good? Um, that can be really crazy. If I'm just walking around talking to my own body, people are like, why would you do that? But if I explain, I arrived at this relationship to myself through being a yoga teacher, through being a meditation teacher, deepening my relationship to myself in different ways, seeing myself as more complex and not one fixed, understandable entity. Now people go, oh, there's more logic in there. I can see that. There's cultural connection for you because you're Asian, so I can't judge, right? But I can't always explain to people why logically I arrived at being this crazy person. And I don't think that people should always have to be prepared with that.
Right.
I think this is something that is a strength that I bring to mental health advocacy because this didn't start in that space. This started with me having conversations with therapists, and they would say, I don't know, we can't tell if you're psychotic or not. And I would explain my relationship to reality and, grounded in some philosophy. And they go, oh, that makes a lot of sense. So since I was a teenager, I've been walking that line of like, it's not either this or that. I guess it's both. I guess I'm both, I don't expect as someone with bipolar disorder to have the same relationship to reality as other people. The same way I don't expect myself as a biracial person to have the same relationship to reality as other people. That's a point of conflict, I think, a lot. And even if it's not something that's always talked about, it really comes out in the few spaces where people who are multiracial are talking to each other. Because we're trying to say, well, this is my experience of that. I think it relates to what you were just saying, and just because you see an individual's expression, you're seeing their idiosyncrasies mixed in with things that might be relatable to other people who have a particular identity label. But to take those idiosyncrasies and go, oh, that's the way everybody is who's like this, that's never going to be the case.
Yeah. And as you're kind of saying at the beginning, that, because you hold these multiple identities that are, complex, but also like really well thought through, right? You have these examples and stories around all these different elements. If you were to explain every aspect of that, that's the whole conversation, right? You could talk to somebody about an hour for an hour just about, these different aspects of your identity and how you relate to reality through them. Right. And that's not fun to do all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, that brings us back to where we started. If we're expected to always say, hello, I am multiply marginalized, or I experience a lot of oppression here, 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 and here, it's going to frame the whole conversation that follows. I have lots of, I think, mutually respectful interactions with people where that never comes up.
Mhm.
And if I did just all of a sudden force identity labels into the conversation, that's we're having a different conversation. We're having a different interaction. And the way it's going to be remembered is different. I don't
Yeah.
always want people to remember me and then go, oh, let's place that person in the Asian box. Let's place that person in the, multiply disabled box. And now every time they think about me, they're trying to, it's a lens. They're saying, oh, I see this person through the disabled person lens all the time.
Yeah.
And this is, I think, what we're trying to move away from is
Yeah.
there are times I absolutely want to be seen, and I need that lens on. This is a problem in the medical space because people might be seeing me in terms of health issues, good and bad. There's some stuff on my record. I'm like, do they always need to see that? Do they always need to be like, oh, okay, we see that you've been crazy. What you seem fine today, but I'm suspicious. No, they don't. I recently contracted strep G, which I did not know was a thing. I was extremely sick. My asthma was the worst it's ever been. And, I was in the ER. And it's like, this is not the time to be considering me through the mental health lens. Unless I'm saying I'm having a panic attack, or unless I'm saying something that is a waste of our time and energy today in this health interaction. And then they're never putting on their trans non-binary lens. And it's like 1 out of 10 health providers will gender me in a way that I feel is in alignment with my own understanding of my gender. And I just have to swallow it and go, sure, I guess I'm a she, her woman right now. But that was very damaging for me when I was in the psych ward held involuntary. Nobody used my pronouns. And in one place in particular, I kept seeing when I would go to the nurses station, like this thing saying LGBTQ friendly hospitals. Like, where?
Yeah.
You're damaging
For
my
who?
mental health so much. When I got out, thankfully, I saw a friend who's also non-binary, and we talked about that. Not only is it real to be non-binary, because I was back to just like, I guess I was the woman the whole time. I don't know myself, right? And we had a conversation where it was like, I needed to be regrounded in a critical part of the work that I do and the affirmations that I'm offering others, which is the trans people of color are not new. There are communities that recognize to this day more than two genders. And there's a lot of global forces and colonization from Western Europe that's trying to overwrite that and place everybody into these binary categories. But we're here, we've been here, we're supposed to be here. And I need to be myself. I can't be pushed back into, I was never good at being a woman. So I was like, I'm not going to try it anymore. Right. I was always like failing something, or I just felt like if I dress very hyper feminine, I feel like it's drag,
Yeah,
and
same.
that's not going to change. That's not going to change for me. So I might do it again someday, but it's going to be because it's drag and not because this is how I feel good when I dress up to go to a party. My school actually has a prom. It's going to be on Saturday. So I'm really excited to wear like masculine formal wear and go there with my partner. And it's like, yes, we're both going to be wearing a suit jacket and fancy men's style dress shoes. And it's, they're still in fashion, they're still considered menswear. So that's what it is. And there's also something affirming for me in saying I am going to dress in masculine formal wear. I haven't worn heels in like 10 years. Like, I'm not doing that. I did get some pretty red sparkly nail polish, so I am excited about that. But yeah, I'm not going to continue to present myself in a way that's about other people's comfort and hiding all of my identities, in order for other people to basically tell themselves a story about our interaction and our relationship that's easier for them and that's more comfortable for them.
Yeah. Oh, I really love this kind of these two pieces of being yourself, which is already like such a complex idea, I feel like, and like interacts with, safety, obviously, for a lot of people, but being able to express yourself and like you're making choices about your body and presentation. And like, this is how I'm going to be in this space and like looking forward to that. And at the same time, so like not hiding who you are, being open about who you are, and not feeling the need to necessarily express all of that in labels and like giving everybody the list of identities, right? It's kind of like you can see me. I am presenting the way that I want to, and I may or may not explain that to you or describe that to you.
Yeah, and there's so many trans and non-binary people at my school, so I feel really safe being able to show up and show out. Even though it's not, honestly, when I go to queer spaces, I probably don't do it as much because
Hmm.
I don't want to have to meet the queer expectation of being a particular kind of queer either. So I think it's really nice to be like, I'm going to this space and I'm going to dress as exactly as I want. It's not about dressing for the community I'm in or dressing to show a certain part of myself. I'm just like, let's do something that's fun and not talk ourselves out of it because of money, because that's tough. Yeah, I've heard about queer people doing adult prom stuff, and this is my chance. So I don't want to look back and say, I couldn't do it because of these limitations.
Mm, yeah. One thing I did want to touch on before we wrap up is one of the articles on your website from a few years ago. End of 2017. You wrote an article, "The Privilege of Getting to Rest. Let's Shift the Balance." And we'll link that in the show notes if anybody wants to go read that. And I would really love for you to talk about this a little bit, just this, because in the like disabled community, people talk about this a lot, right? That this like rest as resistance. I know there's, other writers talking about that as well. And then at the same time, it's like, okay, you have to have privilege to be able to rest adequately. So I would love to hear you talk a little bit about that.
I have a lot to say about that. And that's also something I wrote just because I needed to channel frustration somewhere. And then, of course, nonprofits with, good funding love to reference this article. And I'm just like, I don't think it really brought resources to Rest for Resistance. It's not just about the single, individual organization. I hope it's shifted something beyond that. But for me, I think there's so many things in the conversation about rest that are missing. One is just challenging this idea of what is rest, and that what is restful for you is not what's restful for me, right? Two people can hang out and one person could be super anxious about it and feel like they're overextended, and the other person could be like, this is the most rest I've gotten in a long time. And that's important, because to be the person who's like, I'm getting more rest than I've felt in a while, we do need community to show up and be there for us in some way, to get that mental rest of, I'm allowed to be here and I don't have to worry about the money and I don't have to worry about the time, the travel. Just getting somewhere and back is so difficult for a lot of disabled people. I'm worried about that one today. So it's like, that's a real one. There's that. And it's also that you can't assume who's resting and who's not resting. That's something we need to check in with ourselves about. Rest is not just like taking a vacation, right? I think it has to go so much deeper than that. Rest is not the one day at a spa or any of those things. Those are things that can be restful, but they're not inherently restful, right? Last year, I really wanted to go on some weekend trip, and it just didn't happen because it wasn't going to be restful for my partner. And I don't want to push him to go away for the weekend and he's stressed out about money and questioning if he belongs there and does he feel safe and just all those things. So I was like, let's not do that. It would be more restful to actually choose no weekend trip and figure out, how do we invest in our home being more restful? How do we make sure that we have days where we're setting aside time together, and decompression and rest and getting a break from responsibilities are become our priority? And that's something we can't get until there is a certain number of, dollars in the bank, and there is a certain amount of looking back and saying, I've done a lot to be able to have this space, this boundaried space that's like a little rest bubble. And the ingredients to make that little rest bubble are different for all of us, and they also change for the individual over time. So a lot of where I've gone since writing that article is realizing we are resting in every moment. There is no such thing as 100% work. Like, a lot of people were on our computer working. That may not be restful. I have photosensitivity, so that can make people sick. But is it restful compared to a job that like a day laborer might be doing, using their body all day? Somebody who's delivering food, right? That's not very restful compared to sitting at home in one place all day. So I could be so stressed out doing the work that I'm doing in this condition, but at the same time, I want to be grateful for the rest that I am able to access in this condition. And also, figure out my own balance of, when does sitting at the desk become too much? And now my back hurts, and now my migraine is worse, and all these things. But also not just see it as work equals 100% bad. If I am doing this kind of work, it is always going to be detrimental. It is always going to be hard. It is always going to be difficult. I'm also somebody who does enjoy a lot of work. So I've also written on Rest for Resistance about rest debt and being a workaholic. And that was a really pivotal piece for me. I think writing that was like some self-permissioning to shift my relationship with work. But I'm not somebody who wants a life without work. I don't like that a lot of disabled people are expected to not work in a career way. I don't think that that's right. And I don't think that here in the United States, it's okay that it's like, well, if you want support from the government as a disabled person, you need to not work.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is its whole own catch-22 of it then being like almost impossible to build a life that actually works within that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know I work too much to qualify for disability. I've talked to the disability lawyers about it. And I also know I'm somebody, like, I can really enjoy different kinds of work. It's not always, but I'm not going to choose work for myself within what I'm capable of and what's available. I'm not saying of all possible work options, out of the work that I do get to choose from, I'm not going to choose the things that feel horrible to me, right?
Hmm.
I'm going to make choices to work in ways where hopefully I can enjoy it 50% of the time. And of course, we all have moments, whether it's work or just doing chores or self care, right? It's like taking a shower and brushing my teeth could be the biggest, most difficult work of the day. Um, but I want to stay in touch with how do I enjoy the activities that I have in my life, and what is that boundary where I cross, and now it becomes like a workaholic problem. Now it becomes really detrimental to me in a way that I need help from myself and also from other people. I need help to shift that and have different boundaries. It doesn't happen overnight, right?
Totally. Yeah. So, everyone listening, obviously, as you can hear, Dom has a huge amount of wonderful thoughts on these topics. And we're definitely going to send you toward restforresistance.com, which we'll also link. Is there anywhere else that you would like people to find you online or reach out to you?
Yes, we are on Instagram. It is at QTPoC mental health. It may change to be rest for resistance. We're keeping it that for now.
Mhm.
We have two Facebook pages. One is QTPoC mental health. One is rest for resistance. So the rest for resistance page, we try to keep these are our events. This is what we're publishing. And maybe, supporting community members we're in direct relationship with they're doing a cool retreat or something. And QTPoC mental health is, it's not a meme page, but if you're gonna see memes from from the organization, that's the spot. And just sharing news that may be positive. Yeah, if I see something and I'm like, I think this will be beneficial for most, the mental health of most of the community, I'll probably share it. The feel good news, that kind of stuff is on the QTPoC mental health Facebook page. And we are also on Eventbrite. I got to
Oh,
remember
cool.
to plug that one. Follow us on Eventbrite, and then you will see our meditations. We just began yoga once a month. And like I said, Rust Fest is coming up soon. We will have online events, and we will also have some in person events in New York City, which is the original home of the organization. We got people all over, but it'll be nice to rest together in person here. I think that'll be over 4th of July weekend.
Awesome. And then, if you would like to answer this optional question, do you have any advice for yourself at another age?
Yes, I'm like, oh no, my younger selves have something to say. Stay in touch with me. I talk to my younger selves, and it started with my teen self and realizing that they're always cheering me on. They're always so proud of me. And through that, now I feel like I'm more in touch with my, inner child and inner infant. And there's nobody who can replace the support from myself. And so I find that so important. And that's something I didn't know when I was younger. And I don't think anybody's really told me this. But I really appreciate the relationship I have with my former selves. It sounds cheesy to say, but it's like this is what's coming up for me. And maybe that helps somebody else.
Thank you. I love that so much. Yeah, I am sure that it will. Yeah, thank you so much. Is there anything else that you is just like coming to mind that you're like, I want to put this thing out there?
No, I just want to say thank you. I think this has been such a refreshing interview because there is a lot of, hey, we want to know what your community is doing, right? And it's just like too many things for me to talk about. No. Um, and I feel like in this interview, I really got to speak not as like a representative of the different marginalized communities I'm part of, but just me. And I am part of different communities. But whether I'm representing them actively or not, I'm still me, right?
Yeah. Thank you for saying that because that's 100% my goal in the podcast. So I'm very happy to hear that that is happening, at least for you.
Yeah, it's been very low anxiety and easy to share, in response to your questions. And I'll be in touch if the answer changes. But I don't think I've said anything that I would be like, oh no, don't put that in there.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And we will put all those links you mentioned in the show notes. And I will talk to you all next week. And one last little thing I wanted to add before this episode goes out. Thank you so much to everyone who filled out the form about your content preferences and left ideas and feedback. I'll put that at the end of the show notes again in case anyone else wants to share their thoughts. One person asked, is there a way to make a one-time donation to the podcast? And since the form was anonymous, I don't know who that was and I could not reply to you directly, but thank you so much for asking. This is very much a labor of love. I do pay for podcast hosting and some other related services. And as of now, I'm not interested in external advertising for a lot of reasons. So I really appreciate any support, including the engagement and sharing and feedback. I really want to make this podcast for and about you, the listener. If you would like to make a one-time donation, you can do that at paypal.me/MATTIAMAUREE or venmo.com/MATTIAM, and I'll put those links in the show notes as well. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you. Thanks for listening. If you know someone who would be helped by this podcast, please share it with them. And I'd love to hear your thoughts and suggestions at mattia@mattiamurray.com. That's MATTIA@MATTIAMAUREE.com. Thank you.